Welcome to Alpha507, Alpha Anywhere Source Control with Git. In this course, you are going to learn how to install and use the Git version control system with the Alpha Anywhere application development environment. This industry standard system will help you take your Alpha Anywhere development process to the next level. Version control is the heart of a successful development process. Alpha Anywhere has integrated the Git environment into the development system to make it easy for you to utilize source control right from within your project. The integration of Git will open new and powerful ways for you to approach your development with Alpha Anywhere. In this course, we're going to be covering the following topic: how to install and configure the Git system on your development environment, creating your first local repository. What is a repository and how is it structured on your file system? Using the Git commit system to manage your development process. Using Git to roll back changes in your code. Git branching, the powerful tool for making your development life much easier. Remote repositories, both public and private forms. And lots of other great information about how to use the Git system to improve your environment. By the end of this course, you will be able to confidently set up, configure, and use Git version control within your Alpha Anywhere development application environment. With your training, you'll have received a downloaded file called Alpha507. It's a zip file. And what I'd like you to do is go ahead and right-click on that file after you download and put it on your system and say extract all. This will extract the file folder out of it. So I'm going to actually go and just say put it on the desktop. And I click extract. And what we now have is our workspace environment ready to go. Now what I can do the following is I'll right click on this and say cut it. Then I'm going to go ahead and open my Windows file browser, go to Documents, find my Alpha Anywhere V12 folder and paste it there. This will now paste our development files into our training area. Now again, this may be a different directory for you, it's really up to you, but the key is to unzip this and open it from there. Now that we have our file here, we'll be able to enter into Alpha and start with our project files ready to go. Once you've opened the workspace, you can now go ahead and access the Git integration. To do so, locate the Git icon that's in the mini toolbar at the top. Go ahead and click that icon. Now you'll notice in this case, which you may also get, is that the Git system is not installed. So the Alpha environment requires that you have Git installed on your local machine. So to do so, click the button here, Open Git Install page on your browser. This will take you to the download. Go ahead and select the Windows, or rather you can just click this button right here. Now this number may be different because they continue to enhance it, but go ahead and click that. And you'll notice that it starts downloading the file. It's not a very large one. Now you'll notice that it's finished downloading. It's an exe file, so I'm going to go ahead and click on my browser button here to launch it. This will open up the user account control to confirm that I want to install it. Click yes. And this will launch a regular installer. Click next. This will select a default location for the installation. You can go ahead and leave that or modify it as required by your own environment. In the components, I just go ahead and select the existing components here and go ahead and click next. This will put a shortcut on your start menu and go ahead and click next. Now you have an opportunity to choose which is your default editor. I'm going to go ahead and keep the same, but if you have a favorite editor, you can go ahead and use that. Go ahead and click next. The second option is the recommended, so I'm going to use that. And then in terms of the HTTPS transport backend, I'm going to go ahead and use the OpenSSL library and click next. For this, I want to select the third item, which is checkout as is, commit as is. So go ahead and select that and click next. And we can also go ahead and use the min tty and click next. I go ahead and select keep the standard options here and click next. And in this case, I'm not going to enable experimental. I'm just going to leave it as is because I want to use the plain vanilla. And then I click the install button. This will go ahead and start the installation process. Once the installation is complete, you'll get a notification. You can go ahead and click Finish. This will take you to a web page. You can review it as you need to and go ahead and close out of the browser. Now, to confirm that Alpha sees this, so I'm going to go ahead and exit all the way out of the environment by clicking the X box here. Now I'm going to relaunch Alpha. This will confirm that I want to launch it. Go ahead and reopen the project. You may get this notice if you're not on the most current release. You can go ahead and close this. And now I can confirm that Git was installed. I'm going to then click on the Git icon here. And you'll notice in this case, I now have a Git menu. This is confirmed that Alpha has found the Git executables that you've installed, and you're ready to go ahead and proceed. To access Git in your project, click the Git icon. If you don't see this menu, then go ahead and reinstall Git or verify that your installation is completed correctly. So in this case, we have a situation where we're going to go ahead and use option number 1, which in this case is we're going to make a local Git repository. We will cover the second option a little later in our training. So the idea behind this is that we're going to have an existing project and we want to go ahead and create a repository and place our existing files into that repository. Once that's done, we can then use the power of Git to manage those files in the file versioning. So if you'll notice in this case, we have a checkbox here that says add all files in the web project to the repository when creating this repository. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes, and I'm going to leave that checked because I want to include anything I already have in my project area. So I'm going to click here. You'll see in a moment, very fast, it's automatically created my Git repository. Now the reality is that may take a little longer if you have more pages or more content in your project. But in our case, we really only have a single page, so it went very, very quickly. Now you'll see that since I've enabled the Git option, I now have a series of different items on my toolbar here. First, I have a Git settings link, so I can modify my settings. It also is now showing me the different files and the status of those files. And then we also have new features to push to GitHub and pull to GitHub. And again, we'll come back and cover those in more detail. You'll also notice something. The file that's located here in my project browser for A5W pages has a color, and the color actually specifies a state of that information from a source control standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this Git settings. And you'll see that we have some different options. We can edit the Git ignore file, which we'll come back in a little bit. We can register or change the remote repository. So if we have a situation where it's moved, we can do that. We can also save our user an ID for that repository up on GitHub. And the last one is called Customize Color Coding. So let's just take a quick look at that. So you'll see here, this is the different types of file states that we're tracking. We have things called tracked, untracked files, modified files, and committed files. And you'll see there's a standard set of colors that are associated with that. And you can modify those colors as you see fit that may be more appropriate for what you're doing or your preference, really. So you'll notice that since I've created my Git repository and I asked it to include the index file, it has already placed that into my repository. And you can see since it's a tracked file, it's using a green color to track that. So I can immediately see the state of this file in this situation. And as you make modifications, as you make changes, the color coding will help you visualize what is going on and the state of your files in your system here. So that's a quick introduction of how to start your Git repository. Now we're going to move on to how to actually utilize it, where it's located on the drive, and different scenarios that we'll come across. The first thing I want to do before I actually go in and start demonstrating how Git interacts with Alpha is to show you what has been created when we created our Git repository. So to do so, I'm going to click here on the Open Project folder because that's where the Git repository was placed. So I'm going to click here. And you'll notice this opens up essentially where on my hard drive my web project is. Now, very important, let's look at the structure of the file folders. That's important for you to understand. I'm going to go ahead and click here on Alpha Anywhere v12. this is where I had my folder. I'm going to go inside that folder, and this is called the workspace area. So you can see we have our primary file here, which is our Alpha5 workspace document. Now below that, you'll see it has automatically generated something called web projects. And I'll go into web projects, and you'll see that we have a single web project. Now when you create a new project or a new workspace, it's going to do all that for you. And in fact, you can see up here in the left-hand corner, it says default, and I'm in the web project. What's neat is you could have multiple web projects within a single workspace. In this case, we have only one. Now, the most important concept you need to understand is that the Git integration works at the project level. That means all of this file and other information here is not actually put into repositories. It is only the things within a web project. And so let's go ahead and explore that. I'm going to go in here to Alpha507 Web Projects. I'm going to go into my default web project. And you'll notice this is my current file structure. In here we have index.a5w, and that is our a5w page that we had in our project when we started. But you'll notice a couple other things here. We've got an undo folder, but most importantly, there's now a new folder here called .git. Now you'll notice it's kind of highlighted in gray, or it's kind of a off color there. Now the important thing for you to realize is that you may not see that. And the reason why is that I have currently turned on Show Hidden File Items. So I actually have this enabled. If you do not see this GIT subdirectory, you'll have to make sure you select the hidden items. And I did that under View, Hidden Items. Now what's inside there is a whole bunch of stuff that you really don't have to worry about, but let you know that Git is going to manage all of this content in here, and it's going to manage all of your files, etc. for you within this environment. So Git, when you create a new repository, is basically creating a hidden folder where it then manages and tracks all of your activity. And we're going to cover that in a little bit more detail. Now, very important for you to understand is you never want to delete this because this is your repository here. It is a local repository, so it's on this particular machine. And it's hidden, so you may not see it. And over time, this repository will grow larger as you add more files, as you do more versioning, etc. Now, very important also, and again, I can't stress this enough, Git integration works at the project level. So if I create a new project over here, I'm going to have a new folder here, and if I create a Git repository, it will be within that folder. So we do things at the project level. If I were to then create that new folder, then only changes that occur inside this folder actually go inside my default web project Git repository. If I have a second folder and I do anything inside there, you'll have a second hidden Git repository in there, and it'll manage it there. And that's just something that's important for you to understand. And we're going to talk a little bit later. Certain settings are at the project level, certain settings are at the workspace level. You just need to know where those settings are so you can properly assess it. So I'm going to go ahead and close here. Go back into my development environment, and now we can move on to actually how to use Git within Alpha to help you manage your file states and file versioning. So now we're able to dive in and actually show how we can use Git to manage our files. So you'll notice we're at the Web Projects control panel. We have a single file here called index, and it's got a green color. And that green color says it's being tracked, meaning the system is tracking that file. Now you'll notice up here on the header area we have untracked file 0. That means we don't have any files that are not being tracked, but we do have 2 modified files. So let's go ahead and click on this to open that up. Now when you click on that, it's going to open up the Git commit window. So you'll see that up top we have what's called a commit message. I'll talk about that in a moment. Here we have our tracked files. So we have our 2 files that are being tracked. One is our index file, the other is our git ignore file. That is the file that's underneath that's there to kind of ignore all the other files we really don't want it to handle. So let's go ahead and click all, and we're going to go ahead and commit these into our Git repository. That means we're going to actually check them in so there's a point in history. So I'm just going to call this initial commit. You'll notice that I've highlighted all of these by clicking all. You could also use either drag, shift click, or the other methods to select the ones you want. Notice we don't have any untracked, so we're going to leave them be, and we click commit. this will now run a git command, and that git command will actually commit this information into or move those files into our file versioning inside Git. So you'll notice here that it's giving us a commit response saying it did this, it created 2 of those, and it loaded them into the Git repository. So I'm going to go ahead and click Close. And now you'll see that our screen has been updated. First, modified files have gone to 0 because now the files that are currently in what I call my working directory, that's sort of in my project, are identical to the files that are in the Git repository. And you'll notice here, index has also changed color so that it's kind of a plain color. It says everything's good to go and we're in sync. So now the classic examples. Now I'm going to start making modifications to my system. So let's take a very simple one here. I'm going to go ahead and open up index here, and I'm going to go ahead and modify this file. So I'm going to go to the end of the first step. I'm going to say first modification. Very simple. And I'm going to click the Save button to save this file. So everything's the regular, normal way you work with Alpha. I'm going to go back to the Web Projects Control Panel, and you'll now notice that the interface has changed. First, it shows me the index file is now in red. And again, you can change these colors, whatever you'd like them to be. But it notes that this file now is out of sync with what's in my repository, meaning it's been modified. So it's really tracking the differences between what's in the Git repository and what is currently in my folder or my working folder. So now if I go up here and click Modified Files 1, this opens it up here. You'll see it gives me a list of items here. So in our case, the one file that we've changed called index. I'm going to go ahead and give it a commit message. So I'm going to go modify index page. And these commit messages are important. It basically tells anybody who's using this repository what are the changes that are being checked into the Git repository. So now I'm going to go ahead and click commit. You'll notice that it gives me a update saying it's one file has changed, all good to go, and I click close. Per before, you'll see now that our untracked files are 0, or our modified files are 0, and our index is now back to a normal color, which means it is in sync with what's in the Git repository. Now the important thing about this, and we don't really have that facility within this, but I'll show you in our next section. The important thing is as you put these essentially commits into the Git repository, at any time you can roll back to that point in time. So it allows you to manage these files and manage the versions of them. So if you need to go back and roll back to a different version, etc., you're going to be able to do that. Now Alpha has built-in capabilities to kind of track changes to components and grids, but this now provides that capability for everything. And I'm going to actually use a different tool in a minute to show you the history behind it. So let's just demonstrate one other thing. Let's go ahead and create a new file in our system. And notice I'm using an A5W page, but this could be a web component, CSS, JavaScript, anything. All of those files are going to be tracked and managed. So I'm going to click here to new, and I'm just going to go home page, and I'm going to save this as home.a5w. Now that I can go back to my Web Projects Control Panel, and you'll notice, first, our index page, we haven't made any changes, so that's the same. So therefore, our modified files are 0. But you'll notice now that the new file that I created is called home.a5w page, and it's in yellow. And that's because this is called untracked. This means at this point in time, it exists only in my working directory, and the Git repository doesn't know anything about it, meaning it's kind of not part of the repository. So let's go ahead and click Untracked Files here. You'll notice now it looks a little differently. We still have the same interface here, but you'll see we have our commit message, our tracked files, but now we have an untracked file. So our first step whenever we create a new file is to actually check it into the repository so it starts getting tracked. So I'm going to go ahead and select this here, and I'm going to click here. Now that I put in the commit message, I'm going to go ahead and click commit, And notice it has now added or created a new file in there. Click close. We're in sync with the repository, meaning my working files are exactly the same as in the repository, and you'll see our untracked and modified files are back to 0. And if any time I want to double check that, I can click here just to make sure everything, and that should be automatic, but sometimes there may be some differences. So the core use of the Git repository is basically to allow you to check things into the repository, and as you modify them or add new ones, you can make these commits, and at any time you can roll back, and we'll show you some of those concepts a little bit later. So that's the quick introduction. What I'd like to do next is to kind of dive in below and actually show you what's going on in the repository and the history that's being tracked within the system by the Git system along with Alpha. So as you can see, it's very easy for you to manage the process of tracking files. But I want to take the moment to go behind the scenes and show you a little bit about what's going on in the Git repository. And to do so, I'm going to use a third-party product called TowerGit. It's my preferred one. There are many other Git clients that are available in the marketplace. This one is just one I personally like. It seems to be a very visual, easy-to-use tool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move into my Git Tower product, and I'll walk you through the interface real quick. So first, this is called working copy. This is showing essentially, much like here where you're seeing the different colors, what is the state of going on in my Git or my working copy before things go into Git. But you'll notice over here we have master. That is our Git repository. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you're going to notice that it's giving me a visual representation of the history of the Git. So let's go ahead and move this over a little bit and we'll walk through them. So you'll remember we did our initial commit. That was our first thing we did. And we had two files here, git ignore and index. So the cool thing about that is that we now have a point in history showing exactly what our project was with just these two files in it. And those were checked in. And you'll notice it shows who committed it, what time, etc. And we're using that message to say what it is. Now remember, our second thing we did is we opened up our index page and we modified the page, and then we checked that modification in. So let's go back to our Git repository viewer, and now I'm going to go to this second commitment right here. And you'll see that it's showing, we modified an existing file, in this case index.a5w, and checked it in. And I gave it a commit message here, a modified index page. Now the last thing we did at this point is we added a new file. So remember, we went in here, we added home, we saved it, and then we did a commit. So you'll notice in here that it has a single thing that's going on right here called added home.a5w, and that is our new file. So as you can see, we're basically creating a history of these different steps. And as I'll show you a little bit later, one of the most powerful things is now you can roll back, you can do other things. Very, very simple to use. Now, the important thing is I don't actually have to use this tool. I can do these different steps here. But when I start doing things called branching and doing the restores, I'll probably use a third-party tool. So you want to look out there and find a good one that you think will work well for you. Now, the neat thing about it is that both Alpha and these tools are basically pointing at that hidden directory. So they're both working in conjunction together. So let me go ahead and show you kind of how that's going on. Basically, they're both looking at our folder where this project is at, and then the hidden folder below it. So let's do another sample thing. So let's go into home and let's modify that file. So everything's in sync. You'll see that our current project, our working files, are in sync with what's in the repository. And if I go back here and click on working copy, you'll see that this is saying, hey, there's nothing different. Everything is in sync. So now I'm going to go into Alpha. I'll go into my home. I'm going to say modify home page and save it. So now we've saved a modification. So now I'm going to go back to my web projects control panel. As before, you'll see now it's showing me we have a modified file, and it's showing me which file it is, and it's showing me the color coding. I'm going to go back to the Git repository or Git tower, and you'll see something similar. Basically, this is showing me, oh, in your working copy, which means my file folder where I'm doing my work, I am currently have a single new change to it. And you'll see over here that it's showing me I have my home file and it has my modified. Now in this case, this is a HTML page, so it can actually show me a little diff right here, which is kind of nice and allows me to see a little more details. When you start getting into components and stuff, this is a little less valuable because components have a ton of JSON data in it, a little hard to see things. But if you're doing text or HTML, it's kind of nice. You can see here's the original and here's the change, etc. from here. Now, I'm going to go back into Alpha. So you'll notice our head right here. If I click here, we're at 3. So our working copy currently is out of sync with our head, which means the current position of our repository. So let's go into Alpha. I'm going to go up here to Modified Files. I'm going to select here, and I'm going to go Modify Home Page, and I'm going to click Commit. So notice it's done one file change. Give me the confirmation. I click Close, and now we're back to here. Now we can go back and actually see visually what's going on. You'll notice that it automatically updated our history. So you'll see now our working copy is empty because it took that file change and actually moved it into our repository. If I go to my master here, you'll see that we have our new commitment right here, and we're currently at that commitment. So you'll see Modify Home Page. Here's the file that was modified. And actually, in this case, I can see the modification. I added that new text right here. So these third-party tools give you a little more visualization, a little history in there, but you don't have to use them. The nice thing is Alpha can go through and do these pieces here. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is one of the most powerful aspects is like, let's say something was screwed up and you want to restore back to a certain point in time. I'm going to actually show how that works in the next few moments. Now, as mentioned before, one of the most powerful aspects is the version control, the ability for you to have these sort of check-ins, and if anything goes wrong, the ability to go back in time. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that now. In order to demonstrate it, I'm going to use our tower system. So let's go into tower. You'll see our last change was to modify our home page. In that case, we just added this new text, modify home page. So I'll go back here and you'll see we have our modify home page. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm going to close these. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in here and you'll see that if I want to go back in time, there's a nice function. I can click on here and I can say check out this particular commit. Now you'll notice it has these unique IDs in here. So we have our commit message, but behind the scenes it's tracking everything by a unique ID. So let's go ahead and say check out. And now you'll notice that we've checked out this item here. So we're back at this commitment. So if I click right here, we're back at that commitment level. And you can see we see our last point of there. Now if I go into Alpha and I go ahead and open up my home page, you'll see, our change is not there. Which means the following is that basically it took the files back out of the repository and reset my working environment to be exactly what that was. So in this case, what happened is before, here's our master, we had that modification. We basically checked out this. So now we're at the point where we only see the things at that point. Now what we can do here is go ahead and say, I'm going to go back into Alpha. Going to go ahead and close this. And now I'm going to go ahead and check out the master. And you'll notice now that it's basically reset back to this point in time. So if I go back into Alpha and I open up our home page, there's our modified home page. So very important is that at each point it's tracking these. So if anything ever goes wrong, I can essentially reverse in time. In fact, I can do something even more powerful, and you have to be very careful about this. Let's say this modify home page, you just go, you know what, that was a screw up, we don't want to do it. So I can actually right click here and I can delete that here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that commitment. And it's going to ask me, do you want to delete that revisions? And this is permanent. It won't allow you to do it. And so I'm now back to this point in time. So if I go into Alpha and I go back into here, you'll see that now I'm back to that point in time. So you can either kind of roll back temporarily, do some stuff, so if you lost some files or do other things. And remember, this tracks all your files. If you delete files, if you modify them, if you add them, it's tracking all of that activity. So it's very powerful to allow you to kind of go back in time and move forward in time to do these pieces here. Now, when I deleted it, you'll notice that that actual commitment is gone forever. And there are other methods and other manners. Now, what we are going to talk about in our next section is the concept of branching. This is super powerful because it allows you to control your process at a much sort of development process in a much more coordinated way. And it's very important if you're in a production environment what may happen. And we'll come back in and talk about that next. But the important thing for you to take away on this is the fact that at each point in time when you commit, it's basically taking a snapshot of everything in your project and putting it into Git. And therefore, if you roll back, it basically is taking those files and restoring it back in your working directory, i.e. your current folder, what it was at that one point in time. So really neat in terms of when you have more complex projects, allows you to really manage these things very nicely. But I do want to introduce the concept of branching because from a development standpoint, I think you're really going to enjoy it, and that's going to be in the next section. Now I want to introduce one of the most powerful capabilities for development and development teams in Git. In fact, once you start embracing Git, this should become a standard way for you to handle things, and it's called branching. The idea behind branching is that you can essentially, instead of having one path, you'll see we have one path, and I'm kind of going back and forward on there. What this allows you to actually do is fork to a different. And I'm going to include some other videos that kind of give you a little bit of the background, but it's really nice because this allows you to kind of go off on a path, do some stuff, but not really mess with your core abilities of your application. So a great example of that is, let's say I have my production version. I've gone ahead and here is my alpha solution. It's got 2 pages. It's working great. I've deployed it to my server. And then someone out comes up and says, you know what? We have this great idea. We found a bug. It doesn't matter. Some situation where you want to go in and you want to do some changes. So we can sit down and say, okay, yeah, we're ready to do some experimentation. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to modify the home page to put the person's first name or something along those lines there. So I could go ahead and modify the home page, check it in, etc., and we'll have it along this sort of history vertically. But what I can do but a more powerful way is the following, and I'll show you why in a moment, why it's so powerful. So again, you really can't do branching from within the alpha environment. It's more of just checking in, making it easy to do those pieces there, and also pulling existing projects, etc. So I'm going to go back into Tower, and I'm going to show you in Tower how I do this. So I'm going to go here to my branches. You'll see I have current branches. In fact, my master is a branch. That's kind of my primary branch that I use with. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to right click and go down here to create new branch from master. And again, each tool does it a little differently, but this is the Tower tool. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a name, which I'll call new home page. My starting point is master. So I want to start it from this point here. Branches can get pretty crazy. You don't need to have it very crazy. It's basically, I'm just saying, take where we're at the beginning and move over there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to track that. So it starts tracking the files, but most importantly, I'm going to check it out. So when we start doing stuff, we're actually working within that branch. So I'm going to click Checkout Branch, and I'll call Create Branch. So you'll now notice in our case, we have master and we have new home page, and you'll notice we're at the head. And it looks identical in terms of the history because we branched at the same point in time. Now when I go into alpha, you don't see any difference. It's basically, this is kind of doing some stuff behind the scenes. So now I can start doing my experiment. I'm actually working, and this is the important thing here, is by checking out this, it's going to start tracking things in this new branch. So now we can start making our modifications. I'm going to go ahead and open up the home page. And I'm going to go ahead in here and go, welcome, super user. this is our cool home page. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, what's going on in here is that, as we've seen before, it starts tracking that. But what's important is tracking it in the new home page area. And vice versa, if I go ahead and close this, go to my Web Projects Control Panel, we're going to see the same thing going on here. So let's go ahead and check that in. I've made my changes, I've tested, I'm ready to go. I'm going to say modifications to home page. I'm going to select that one right here and click commit. And now we have a commitment. And we're back to there. If we go in here, you'll see our working copy is here and our commit is in our branch. You'll notice that the commitment is in the branch. That's the important thing. If I go back to master, it's identical as what is before. Now, in terms of tower, it gives me a little thing saying, oh, you know what? Your new home page now is out of sync with master, meaning you're one ahead. It's basically everything in master, but with an extra commitment, i.e. 1. So now I can continue working with it. I never have to worry about modifying my master. So I can go back in here. I can reopen this. I am updating this because the users want another message. So this allows you to kind of do all those pieces here. And I can click Save. And I'll go back to my Web Projects Control Panel. I'll check things in. I'll go Extra Message. Select this here and click Commit. So now you'll see in a moment we have our new commitment here of extra message. So it's tracking all those things, and I'm 2 essentially commits ahead of master. Now the important thing about that is, and I'll come back in the next section, is to kind of show you when you're doing bug fixes and stuff like this. This is really handy. Now I've done all my changes, everything looks great, and I now want to merge this information back into master. That means the following is what we want to do is we want to take all of our changes that we were working on and go and move them back so that they're now with our master branch. Thus, everything is in the same situation. And this is kind of the classic. You create a branch, you make your modifications, make sure they're great. This allows you to kind of keep a nice clean set of your production code. Maybe these are debug tests or whatever. And then when you're ready to go, you can check that back in and bring everything into sync. So now your master has all of your changes. Now, the way we do that is the following. First thing you need to do in terms of Git is you need to check back out the master because you merge branches into your current checked out item. So I'm going to click on master and click check out master. So this will now say what is my current, what we're working on, my head position. And you can still see here we have this there. Now I want to show you something kind of cool before I do this. I'm going to go back into Alpha and I'm going to go into the home. And notice all of those changes aren't in there. And the reason why is all of those changes were done in my branch, not in my master. So when I went here and clicked check it out, it basically swapped out of all my local files so that it was identical in my working directory to what was in the repository with this information here. Now the last step I need to do is I need to merge my branch. I need to take my changes and move them into my master. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go ahead and click and copy. Now I'm dragging on here. That's just how this tool works here. I can also go ahead and say, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag it onto master. You'll notice a little merge message comes up. Click here and you'll see the branches. I'm going to merge new home page into master. And I'm going to go ahead and click merge. It does its thing. You'll see now that master, we're at the head. If I click here, you'll see all of those new changes are here. So it's taken all of my modifications in this branch, moved them in here. Now I could continue working on this one here, or I could just go ahead and say, you know what? Let's go ahead and delete this branch because I'm done. I'm done working on the new home page, and now I'm back to my production code there. So branches are really nice because let's say you go ahead and do a bunch of stuff and you go, oh, I don't want any of that stuff. Well, you don't have to merge it back into the master. You can just delete it and be good to go. But I'm going to show you a more important reason why we'll do this in our next section, which is mainly the classic. I'm working on some new features. I have a quick bug fix, need to do it. I want to show you how that process would work. So again, we now are at master. All of our changes are in here. In fact, if I go in here and open up my home page, you'll see that notice all of my changes that I've been doing so far are here. And we're ready to move on to our next section, where we'll talk about how you can use it from a cool new feature bug tracking kind of methodology. So now let's kind of show you where branching really pays off in big time. Often you'll have a scenario where you're creating new features, you're doing a lot of work on it, you have a production system up and running, and you have a critical bug fix. The problem is you don't want to have all these changes that you've been working on come into your production. You just want that one bug fix. So let's go ahead and do the following. I'm going to go ahead and go back into Tower. So we're ready to do I'm going to do some new features. So I'm going to add a new page. I'm going to do a whole bunch of cool stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do here is go to Master, and I'm going to create a new branch from Master, and I'll call it New Features, and we'll track and do that. So I'll create my branch, much like I did before. And basically all it's doing is forking my code so it's ready to go. So now we have our new features here. And you'll notice they're both the same, and the head here, there's no little I number or anything else from here. Now, important, you'll notice that I've checked out new features. So therefore, any things I do inside Alpha is now going to be in this branch. So I'm now going to go in here, and let's add our new features. Let's say it's a whole new page, like a contact page. So I'm going to create a new page here. And I'm going to go contact page, new feature. And I'll go ahead and click save. And I'll go contact.a5w. Great. Go ahead and check that in. New contact page. You'll notice it's showing here, this is called an untracked file, meaning we haven't used it before. It's not modified, it's brand new. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that in there. And you'll see it's added my little feature and say it's added that file into the system. I'm back to normal. When I go back to Tower, you'll now notice that our new features branch has our new commitment. That's our new added file here called contact.a5w. And you'll notice that we're one ahead of master. So we can continue working on that. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to this contact page. I'm going to say enter your contact data. And I'm using A5W pages, but this could be new components, new grids, new A5W, or I'm sorry, XBasic files. You name it. First, last, middle. So I go through and I do all my tracking and testing and everything else here. I save it. I go in my web projects control panel. I'm going to go ahead and add that in. I'll go new modifications and I click commit. Great. So everything's going great. I'm on my branch. I'm doing all this great stuff. You'll notice now I'm 2 ahead there. Then all of a sudden you get an urgent call. Uh-oh, something's wrong with the home page. Something needs to be modified to the home page. And you're like, I've added all these new files. I've made all these modifications. What do I do? Life gets really nice. So the first thing I'm going to do is you'll notice again, I'm currently checking out new features. So when I'm in Alpha, I'm working on my new feature branch. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to master and I'm going to check out master. So think of it as a pointer. New features is still there. It's in my repository. But now in my working directory, if I go back here, notice my contact page is gone. So it basically reverts me back exactly where I was before on that production branch. Now I can open this up. I can say bug fix, click save. We'll go ahead and close this. And we'll go ahead and check this in. And I'll call this urgent bug fix. Add that modification in there, commit it. It's in there, and I can go ahead and publish this to my website, etc. But you notice I didn't have to worry about any new items. I kind of knew I was working on that production version, so any changes I made were almost identical to what I have out in production. Now, if I go back here, you'll notice that it's tracked that new there, and it's also said, hey, in our new features branch, I'm 2 ahead, meaning I have 2 commits I've made. But there's another one in master, and this is the power. Git is kind of tracking the file differences between the two. So I can continue working with new features. So in fact, I'm going to go ahead and check this out now. Let's say I have another thing I need to do on this. So I'll go ahead and notice it's brought back my contact page. Go in here. I'll go address, city, state, and I'll save that. And everything's great and working good. Go back to my web projects control panel, check that all in. Last change. So as you can see, it allows you to kind of structure how you're working so life is easier. And you'll see that, notice we're still 3 out, meaning that here are my branches here, but there was that urgent bug fix. So it knows the differences between my features and my master. So now we're ready to get back to production, and we want to have 2 things go on. First, we want to have all our new changes incorporated in production, but also we want to make sure that any bug fixes that were done are properly kept in the master. And that's important. Often when you start changing the same files and you're doing it in different branches, it's going to walk you through the process to make sure that your changes are incorporated properly. So remember, first thing I need to do is go to master and check it out. Once I've checked it out, I can now click new features and I can say merge. This will bring up my merge process. I can click merge here. So now you'll notice that it's done a merge, and you can see it by this bringing in information. So you're going to see it has our urgent bug fix. It has my 3 changes all in the same item here. So if I go here, you'll see that now in my checked out branch, remember we're checked out with master, we have our contact form, we have all of our changes to the bug fix, and everything is in sync and ready to go. So I have both the items of that branch and from there. Now the reason it's saying -2 is because we don't have this merge thing in here, but I'm done with new features. So I can click on here, I can delete it, and we delete the branch, and now we're ready to go. So the next time I go into the next feature cycle, I can create a new branch, do my stuff. If I ever have to jump back and do any fixes, urgent fixes. So as you can see, this really helps you in terms of your development process. It takes away from you manually tracking all your changes or creating a backup folder and then modifying things in that folder and then copying them together, which is very problematic, especially when you have a large number of files. Because you modify a few things, it can get pretty crazy pretty quickly. But as you can see, it also gives you a history. So if you ever have a scenario where you need to go back to a certain period of time, you can use that methodology to return back to a point in time, a commitment, and that just shows up in your working directory. So branches are super powerful. It's highly recommended whenever you're going to start doing anything on a system, you branch immediately. And the reason why is sometimes you start working on stuff and you just end up throwing away the work because it didn't turn out to be what you want to do. You were doing an experiment. You were testing a new feature, you were doing a modification just to see if people liked it. And often those never end up in your production version. The beauty of that is that you never have to worry about tracking all that stuff. You create a branch, do your stuff there, either merge it back into the master or delete it. It's up to you and how it goes from there. So that's a quick introduction to branching. Now we're going to go on and talk a little bit more about remote repositories and other pieces there. In this segment, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can use what are called remote repositories, and specifically the ability for you to start a project with a remote repository with code already ready to go. And you'll see this more and more in the Alpha world because Alpha Anywhere, the team, is specifically starting to deploy their examples and other items into repositories that you can just tie in and bring right down into your environment. Now, one thing we want to talk about before we get started is what is a remote repository. So you'll see I've navigated to github.com. That is a service that's available. It's now owned by Microsoft. It has a free level of service and allows you to use it there for both public and private repositories. And this is basically just a Git repository that's not on your local drive, but up on the cloud. And the cool thing about that is that now becomes a location you can store data, and you can also use it for your own projects. So you can have like a local repository on your local machine, as we've seen before. In fact, let me go ahead and open up here to my File Explorer, go into my documents, and you'll notice in our documents that we have this hidden folder. I have it shown here. I've actually allowed to see hidden folders, but this is a local repository. But you could also have a repository on a server hosted by another company, and you can synchronize your local with that. And that's beneficial for two areas. One, it allows you to back it up into the cloud, so you now have a copy of your repository not on your local machine, but in the cloud for protection and safekeeping. The other, and more importantly, and why we're covering it here, is that it actually allows other people to sync their repositories to that cloud, so a team environment. Or if you want to put content up there and then allow other people, like I'm going to show you in a few moments, this is a very flexible methodology, and it's built into the Git infrastructure, so everything is kind of built into the package, and it allows you to do these pieces very simply. So in our case, what we're going to do is the following. Here we have GitHub. I have two different repositories up on GitHub, and you'll notice that they're named differently. One is called Alpha507 Public, the other one's called Alpha507 Private. And this is a public repository, and this is a private repository. And you'll see there's a little icon, has like a little, like a notebook, but the other one has a little lock. Now, the difference between the two are the following. If it is a public repository, you can go on and see that. There's no security involved from the standpoint of you being able to see it. So it's a very easy way for people to publish code up on the cloud and for you to bring it down into your local environment. A private repository is different. In that case, you actually have to have permission from the repository owner to be able to bring down that content to your local device. So you actually have to get approved to be able to access it. And this is for obviously private code or private scenarios where you only want to have a small team available to see it. Now I'm going to show you how to use both of them. You'll be able to access the public one. Private one, I'll show you and demonstrate how we would go through those pieces here, because it's going to request a username and a password to be able to access that data. So what I'm going to do in the next section is let's focus first on the public repository element, and then the second we'll dive into the private repository element. But the important thing for you to realize is that a repository, this is called a remote repository, is actually up on the cloud. It's actually, in this case, hosted on GitHub up in the under a Microsoft cloud environment. And what I'm going to be doing is bringing that code down into a local repository that is going to be automatically generated on my local machine. So that's the difference between a local repository and a remote. And again, built into the system is the ability to synchronize data between those repositories. So first thing we're going to do is focus on how to access private repositories from within Alpha. Now, the most important thing for you to understand in this particular scenario is the fact that each repository up on the cloud has an address. So you're going to need that URL or a web address to be able to access the repository. So let me go ahead and show you. I'm again in the GitHub, and there's many other services, Bitbucket, that are available. You can pick and choose whatever works best for you. So I'm going to go here to this repository, and I'm going to open it up. And this is the web-based interface. And you can see that it shows me information about the repository. Its address, it shows me what code is currently in there. And most importantly, there's a key file called README where I can actually write and show some information here. So the developer can have information, history, change logs, etc. within the system, and you can see it from there. Now, in this case, I can go over here to the clone or download button here. So I'm going to go ahead, going to scoot that up, and I'm going to click here. And you'll notice when I open that up, it gives me a web address that I can copy. And so you'll see it has a specific name of the service, my particular account, and other information here. And I can actually click this little icon right here and copy it there. Now, I could download this zip and then do it manually, but the nice thing is now Alpha can pull this right into a project without having to go through all that process. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL. Now I'm copying it here, but it may be sent to you via email or available other places. There's many different ways to get that URL. So I'm going to grab that here. Now that I have the link to the remote repository, and it's a public repository, I'm going to go ahead and go into Alpha Anywhere. And in my case, I'm going to create a new empty workspace. So remember, repositories and everything else work at the project level. So I'm going to create first a new empty workspace. So I'm going to click there, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to say Alpha507 _ public. And I'm going to just put that into my Alpha Anywhere directory. So in a few moments, you'll see, and it's asking me to do the startup control panel. I click OK and good to go. So you'll notice that I have my new project, but there's nothing in that project at this point in time. So I'm going to now go over here to actually, let me go ahead and just open it up right here. And you'll see that basically I have public web projects, default web projects. So this is my new file structure that's been created, and there's nothing in there except for an undo. So what I'm going to do next is now I want to pull that data from that public repository into my local project so I can start working with it. To do that, go up here to the Git, show the Git menu, and you'll notice we have three options. Yes, make a Git repository. We've already demonstrated that's for creating a local repository. We also have clone to clone an existing GitHub repository. So I'm going to go ahead and click there. And now it's asking me for that URL, that thing we copied, so it knows where to get that information. So I'm basically just going to paste that information in here, which is the address of my public repository. And I click OK. In a few moments, Alpha will go ahead, call GitHub, identify the files, create a local repository, copy that information down, and then start tracking everything. So you'll notice the moment I finish that, I now have all the content that I need in my project. So I have a couple web pages here, I've got a component, etc. So essentially it sort of automates that process of creating a project from someone else's code. And if I go into here and go back into our default web project, you're going to notice that, oh, look, now I have my set of files here. It's created my Git local repository. And so everything is ready to be used. So I can immediately start editing and acting on this information. And you'll see this happening more and more because it's a very efficient way for us to deliver, us being Giant Killer Training and Alpha, different examples to you. We can create whole template projects and other things, little samples. And all you have to do is create a project, do a clone from the Git repository. Everything's ready to go. I can start immediately going in, editing that information. It's going to include all the content I need. So you'll notice it brought down my HTML, it brought down some image files. I didn't have to worry about creating folders, copying things in. It's a really efficient way. And now I can go ahead and start using it. So for instance, if I'm in here and I go to this, let me go to my index page and I'll say training example. Go ahead and close this. So I'll go ahead and put in training example, and I'll go ahead and close this and save it. You'll notice that it is automatically starting to track these changes. So I can click in here, click here and say modify index and commit that. And it's committed. Now, very important, it's committed it to my local repository, not up on the server there. And we'll talk a little bit more about pushing and pulling from GitHub in a moment in our next section, but this allows you to then immediately start working here. Now, another limitation of public repositories is that you may not be able to push the code back up onto the remote repository. Often this is kind of a one-way delivery mechanism that it's available. There are certain situations where they're public and they're kind of community, open source projects, etc. So you'll have to understand the limitations of the particular repository that you're trying to connect with. But the easy thing here is that using the built-in tools, once you're given that URL, it's going to go ahead and download all the files, create the repository, get everything ready for you, and you're good to go from there. So our next step is we're going to talk a little bit more about private repositories. It's a little bit differently, but it uses a lot of the same concepts. So let's move along to that. So we've covered public repositories, but how do public or private ones work a little differently? Well, let me show you. First thing I'm going to do is go back into GitHub. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to the top level here. So I'm going to go into the private repository here. And it's going to look a lot similar. It's got code, other information in there. It's got its own URL. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that URL. So we have the exact one here. Now, the most important difference here is that it's a private repository, meaning that Only way I can access this is that if the owner of the repository gives you a username and password to be able to do that. And that's what you're going to see in a few moments. So let's go ahead and return back into Alpha and go ahead and clone this process. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go into Alpha, and this is my private or public one I was using. So I'm going to go ahead here and go new workspace. I'm going to create a whole new one, and I'll go Alpha507 _ private, just to denote that this is my private one. And I'm going to put that in the same directory here. Open web and clear. So now that we have our project ready to go, or rather our workspace, we can now go ahead and download the files. It's very similar to our process before. We're going to go ahead and go to the Web Projects Control Panel. Click on the Get icon here. This will open up our selection list. Go ahead and click the Clone. This will open up our URL. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we have our URL for our private repository. So I'm here in GitHub, and I'm going to go ahead and copy that. So I have that URL here. Now, a difference is the fact that this is a private repository. If I try and go ahead and just click OK right now, it is going to not allow me to basically download it because it's going to require a username and password. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my password. And once I've done that, now I can click here. Oh, real quick. This should actually be the username for the system, not your email address. In my case, my username is Giant Killer Training for the GitHub repository. Now, also, just to let you know, this is mine. So I set up the repository. I'm kind of checking it down to myself. In your case, what will happen is the user will provide you an invite to use that, and you'll have your own username. So you'll actually put in your username and password, and if you've been invited and approved to use this repository, it will allow you to do so. But again, you put in the URL of the private repository, the username, not the email address, and your password. And once you're done, go ahead and click OK. And as you can see, very similar to what we saw before, we now have access to that data, and it's downloaded it to our local system. It's created a repository, and we are now able to continue to work with it. So to show you a couple little things about it, let's go ahead and look at this private repository. So you'll see here that we have 3 commitments in here, or commits. Here's my current data. So now I can go ahead and do my regular work. So let's say I'm working with another individual, and this is a private repository, and I have permissions. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to create a new A5W page, and I'm going to call it My New Feature. And I'm going to save this as, let's call it new.a5w. So regular development process. We go back here to here. You'll see our new page is now part of our local working directory. So you can see it's under the untracked because it's new. Git has not seen it before. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. Added new page. And you want to be probably a little more verbose than I am. I'm going to select it and click commit. Now again, what's important here is this commitment is local. So if we actually go in and see, if I go back here and refresh my repository on the server, you're going to see it's not here up on GitHub. It's only in my local repository on the local system. But now I have the ability to push and pull to GitHub. So now I have my local repository, and I want to synchronize that up to my remote repository, which is on GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead and push to GitHub. Give it a moment. It's calling GitHub, and you'll see that it's giving me a result that has done a push or from my local master to the master on the server. So now if I go back in here and do a refresh, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see now in my remote repository, my new page is there. So I add it and it gives me the information about that. It also shows I have 4 commitments. So you can see here's the commitment history. My original commits before I downloaded to my local machine, and then the commitment that was just made about a minute ago in terms of sending it from the local machine up there. So remember, very important is when you start making changes and stuff, this is going to change. And if you do check-ins, etc., all that's happening locally. you have to push it. If you want it to be up on the repository, you have to push it to GitHub. And conversely, if something is added on the server, you need to pull that. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that. I'm going to go here to all files, and you're going to see we have a README here. And so I'm going to click edit to README, and it's going to ask me what app to look in, and I'll just go ahead and use Notepad. And this is just showing me here's that file right here. So let's say I go onto the server here. I'm going to go to my repository, and here is my README file. One thing that's kind of neat about the README is I can actually edit it on GitHub. So I'm going to click this little icon right here, and it's going to let me change it right on icon. So I can go here. It's using Markdown, new features. Here is some info on new features. So I've edited that file, but one thing that's kind of cool, if I'll scroll down here, I can actually commit that right into the system. Now you'd probably do this on your local machine, but that's the way it goes. So I'm going to commit the changes. Aha. So now I have my new README here. If I look at the code, you're going to see that the README was updated just a little bit ago. And if I look at the commits, you're going to see that I actually have 5 commits in there now. And you can see that in this case, it was that updated README that happened actually on the server. Now, in my situation, this README is still exactly the same. Let me go ahead and edit that. And you can see it's identical. It doesn't have that change on my local repository. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click pull from GitHub. And what this is going to do is call the server, look if there's any changes and bring them down. So let's go ahead and pull from GitHub. You'll see that, there is some changes here. It's that updated README that I did up there. And it shows me all the information about that. So I can click go. It's now updated my local repository. I can go ahead and edit this. And you'll see, here we go. New features. Here are some of my new features. So again, when you're local, you're working locally, but you can synchronize what you have on the local with the remote. Now you got to be a little careful. Sometimes people, if you have a team, things are being edited, you're out of sync. So often I'll drop back in and use, say, Tower or one of my graphical interfaces to kind of do those things. But for very simple kind of, I want to just do local changes, do a bunch of stuff, and then keep a remote as a backup, archive, share with other people. It works really well, and it makes it simple because you're working within the Alpha environment. You can just do it all within this situation here. And so that's the key difference. As you notice, I needed to enter in a username and password so that I could remotely work with that external or remote repository that was private versus the public one where I can go and just download it, don't need a password, etc., to be able to do that. Another quick topic I would like to cover is something called the git ignore. It's a very important concept because it really will make your life a lot easier when you're using Git. So I'm in my Alpha507 project. I'm going to go to my AL files, and you'll see that there is a text file here called .git ignore. Now, the important thing about git ignore is this. As it says, it's a file that lists things for Git to ignore. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this. And it's going to ask me, I'm going to open it up in Notepad so we can see it in Notepad. So this is a very simple text file. It just has to exist in the same folder as the repository. And in here, we can list different things that we do not want Alpha, or rather Git, to track. Alpha creates a whole bunch of files. So to demonstrate what I mean, let's go ahead and go into web components here. And let's create a new web component here. And I'm just going to create a UX. So I'm just going to, let's go ahead and just grab one of them, and we'll just use something looks like that. And we've set it here. And I'm going to go ahead and save this as main_UX. So I'm just adding a component in there. So now that I've added in there, I'm going to go back to my web projects control panel, and let's look at what's in our directory. So I'm going to click here on open project folder to see what's in there. So you'll notice that there's a number of different files in there. First, you'll see here is our main_ux.a5w component. That is my core component. But you'll notice that Alpha also created something called main_ux._a5wcpm or cmp_manifest. What this is sort of working file information. It is used by the system to precompile elements and do other things to make it very simple for the system to work. And you'll notice it also put in a component type cache, which is another file generated by the Alpha development system. Now the issue may be, this is what you want to save in your repository. You really don't care about this or this. And the reason why is those are automatically generated for you. If they're missing, Alpha's going to take care of regenerating for them. You don't have to worry about it. But the important thing is when you're looking in your repository, you only really want to see your core files. So what git ignore allows you to do is say, you know what, if there's anything with _A5W CMP _ manifest, please ignore that. In fact, you can ignore individual files. So let's go ahead and look at our git ignore right now. So let me go ahead and draw your attention to line 4. So you'll see there's a command in here, and this is called a wildcard command. It's basically saying if you see anything with *._A5W component or CMP and anything after it, ignore that. So by default, since that matches that criteria, it's going to ignore this file here. It will not ignore this one because you'll notice this one doesn't have the underscore in front of the A5W CMP. So what you can do, and Alpha has a standard git ignore that we'll provide you, and I'll put the link below in this lesson, that allows you to ignore that and ignore a whole full subdirectory. So you'll notice another one here up top. It's saying __backup /. And you'll see. So when you create components, as you know, you can go into them and say restore backup because it's keeping copies of that. Well, the reality is you really don't want to keep those backups in your repository. You just want the current version. That's more of a local development tool kind of scenario. So you can actually ignore whole folders. So again, Alpha has a standard one you can use. You can modify and tune it to your need. But the great thing about this is that this makes sure that you don't junk up your repository, that your repository only has the files that are critical to your project, and other files will be generated on the fly as needed by the development environment for you. So git ignore is very important. I often, when I create a new project, that's the first thing I add into my project is the git ignore file, even before I start doing any work. That way Git will look at this file, and anytime you do a future sort of push, then it's going to ignore those other pieces and you'll have a nice clean repository. So again, git ignore is important. Make sure that you put it in there early at the very beginning so that you have a clean git ignore scenario, and you'll find that you're going to have less confusion in terms of what is showing up in your repository. Thank you so much for taking the Alpha507 Alpha Anywhere Source Control with Git course. In this course, you learned how to configure and use the Git version control system within Alpha Anywhere. Here are some of the key topics we covered. How to install and configure the Git system. Creating your first local repository. What is a repository and how is it structured on your file system? Using the Git commit system to manage your development process. Using Git to roll back changes in your code. Git branching, the powerful tool for making your development life much, much easier. Remote repositories, both public and private, and lots of other great information. Your next step in your Giant Killer training is our more advanced courses on developing applications to deploy to your application server. If you want to learn more about building mobile applications using the powerful form view control, you can take Alpha507, Mobile Optimized Forms with Alpha Anywhere. If you'd like to focus on how to build web API systems using Alpha Anywhere, you can take Alpha300, Introduction to Web Services using Alpha Anywhere. These courses are built to be taken in any order as you see fit.